one of the biggest stories in town today, which is your local council. Are they doing a good job or not? We already know, don't we, so many of them are going bust. And now the Local Government Association, which represents a lot of these councils, has basically issued a warning that so many of them do not have enough funds now to simply be able to stand still. You used to be a local councillor. The other interesting thing is that central government has issued a warning to local councils to say any of you lot that are trialling 4-day working weeks, you need to cease and desist immediately. What do you make of the goings on at councils?
Well, the first thing is that this organisation, the Local Government Association, it's sort of in their DNA to keep asking for more money. That's what they do on behalf of local councils. At the same time, I do have some sympathy because council budgets have been cut over the years, but the duties, the responsibilities are getting bigger. And those responsibilities are created by law. So you say, how much do you spend taking a SEND child to school? How much accompaniment does he have? That's all set by law. They don't, or the law, the courts, or the courts. And they don't have any say over the amount of resources they've got to put into that. Their obligations to the elderly and to the homeless, they're all set for them by law, and they can't deviate very much from that. So when those burdens increase, and particularly, I think, when the government is saying that we're taking people out of hotels and we're refugees, so-called claimants for refugee status, out of hotels and putting them on your budget effectively because they'll become homeless, the government's got to step up and pay for that because the councils have no resources to do it. And they're not even allowed to put the council tax up by more than a few percent because that's controlled as well. But why should the council taxpayer pay for some of these things? So I think I've got some sympathy with where the councils are, but they will always be crying, wolf. You can't take it all at face value, but I have got some sympathy with what they're saying at the moment.
Paul?
Been a ticking time bomb for 13 years, hasn't it? It's been a disaster waiting to happen. We have had austerity, certainly for the first decade after 2010, for a large part of it. We see massive cuts to council funding. Some councils in England and Wales, for example, had to endure cuts of around about 30 to 40% of their core government funding. We are seeing spending per head go down by about 20% for some councils. And the truth is that you cannot get public services, local services on the cheap. If you want good provision, if you want effective local public services, then you've got to pay for them. And when you've got a government that has, for the best part of the last decade, been hell-bent on slashing the funding to council services, we end up in a position where councils are in financial crisis. And the sad thing is, actually, these cuts will fall often on the poorest sections of society. The more disadvantaged the area is, the more impact the cuts are likely to have. And this is everyday things. This is open spaces closing. This is libraries closing. This is impact on social care.
It's very little of that.
It's homelessness, Daniel. It's even things like trading standards, it's sports centres and stuff like that.
Trading standards.
Those are the things that are going to be, and it matters.
The vast majority of council spending is going on areas that are to do with personal social services. So the elderly, those who can't manage on their own, children who are taken into care or need to be looked after in some other way, children with special disabilities, things like that. That's where the huge amount of budget actually goes. It isn't going into parks. So where the whole thing is breaking down, if you like, and I'm agreeing with you to some extent, but you're painting too bleak and broad a picture.
Hundreds of libraries have closed, for example.
Hundreds of libraries
have closed.
Hundreds of libraries have closed, you say. I don't know whether...
Well, they have.
Well, you can just assert that. But I don't believe that's actually true. But where the burden is falling is it's falling on, the pressure is coming all on those personal social services. And that's what's got to be addressed. The amount councils actually spend on libraries or open spaces is relatively small. If you took the personal social services out of a council, what you'd be left with would be quite a small budget, which would be perfectly manageable from council tax.
But whether it's small or not, the fact is these are the things that the council often looks to slash first. and it is, you know, an impact on
They
things
can be
like...
done on the cheap.
It is an impact on things like homelessness and sports centres and, as I said, libraries and things like that. And we can't underestimate the impact on people who rely on those services. I mean, hundreds of libraries have closed. They are often used by elderly and vulnerable people, and this is the impact that it has when you when government forces through substantial cuts to government funding. As I said at the beginning, you cannot get public services on the cheap. David Cameron said when he came to power in 2010 and he was hell-bent on imposing his austerity measures, that if any government minister came to him and said that there were no savings to be had in their department, he would send them back and say, go back because you need to find savings, 25% savings or whatever it was at the time that was floated. But
do you not think that's sensible?
Well, I don't think it is particularly sensible because look what happens. 13 years later, we end up in a situation where you've got councils going bankrupt, and this isn't.
Councils are not going bankrupt.
Councils are going.
Our councils are not going bankrupt for that reason. the councils that have gone bankrupt.
For example,
look at Birmingham. Birmingham has gone bankrupt not because it's spending too much, but because it's been caught out on its gender equality pay in the courts. That's what's blown them out of the water, not because they're spending too much money and don't have enough income on services. Croydon went bankrupt because they got involved in a property scheme that took them down. So you're mixing all these things up together, painting an overly bleak, utterly unnuanced, and if I may say so, largely ignorant picture. For party political purposes, simply because you've got a bee in your bonnet about David Cameron sensibly trying to save taxpayers' money from being wasted.
So this is just crying wolf in your view. All of these councils,
no, I have
all
not
of these
said
local
that.
government officials,
you heard what I said. I gave you a nuanced, intelligent, and knowledgeable.
We are suffering, and you can look at studies that have been carried out, for example, by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which has documented in detail the severe impact of substantial cuts in local authorities and what that means in terms of councils being able to deliver services on the ground. It has had a massive impact.
Can you tell me a year in the last 30 years...
who is disadvantaged to rely on those services? It's great.
Can you tell me a year
it's great for you, Daniel,
in the last 30 years
a lovely posh trendy
when the
part of
local
London,
government association
services, it
has not said ahead of a budget councils are going bankrupt? Every year they say councils are going bankrupt because that's their job.
What's your question?
When can you last tell me they didn't say that? They say this every year, Paul. Well, you're just getting elated about this. You're just angry because you didn't get enough.
No, I'm angry. I'm angry because you're ignoring the obvious fact that if you slash council funding by something like a third over 10 years, when you get to the end of that line, you will see a very serious and detrimental impact on public services. To deny that that's the case, I think, is just naive and ignorant.
Well, I'll tell you who is angry, the fella in my ear that keeps telling me that I've got to go to a break. Have you still got your library? What about your local council? And whose side of that conversation are you on? Who do you agree with? Get in touch and let me know.